what were you doing last night? Because I was watching Georgia survive against Kentucky. I was flying home from the game, and I'm there, and you're in TSA, so you got to put your phone away, and Kentucky's leading. And then you're in the terminal, and you're boarding the flight, and you have to put the phone away again for a second as you take off, and Kentucky's still leading. And then you crank up your internet when you get to 10,000 feet, and Kentucky's still leading. What is happening here? And what was happening was Georgia was playing the Clemson game all over again. They just didn't get the second half offensive explosion. I give this game 2.5 Chalai out of 5 on the rating scale because it was lower scoring, not a ton of offense, which I don't always need, but it was an interesting game that ends up with Georgia pulling it out 13-12. Now, as most Georgia fans do, I also look at Georgia and I hold them to a different standard. Just like if Ohio State struggles in a win, or Bama struggles, or Texas, if they struggle in a win against a team they're solidly favored against, I will judge them a little more harshly. So there's a fair amount of that to be had here with Georgia. I don't think it's freak-out time, and I'll tell you why. Georgia has done this before. Last year, Georgia trailed South Carolina at the half at home. You guys remember that? They were on the ropes against Auburn in the fourth quarter down on the Plains. A couple of years ago, they go to Missouri. A lot of them remember that. And Missouri still believes that they should have had that game won, but they didn't. Oh, and by the way, that same year, 2022, they won the national title. They beat Kentucky 16-6 in a bowling shoe ugly game up there. Stetson Bennett had by far his worst performance. So Kentucky kind of does this sometimes. I know they were terrible last week, and it lulled apparently everyone, including Georgia's team, into a false sense of security. But I was looking today at my inbox, and someone DM'd me, and they said, well, are you going to take back what you said about Georgia? And I'm like, what did I say now? And they said, well, you claim Georgia never sleepwalks into a game. I knew what he was talking about. Of course, I was misquoted. I didn't say Georgia never sleepwalks. I said Georgia's never unprepared to play. The coaching staff never fails to have them prepared. Nor do I think they were unprepared in this game, just like in those games I listed there. I mean, there's a year there where they sleptwalked twice, if you want to call it that. You could just call it a dogfight, in a year where they won the national title. So Georgia, I think, was prepared. They just got into a fight. They didn't score early. They didn't score much at all. They got into a fight. Kentucky led them in total yards, 130-63, and had the outright lead at the half, 12-3, first down edge. I mean, if Kentucky had any kind of wherewithal about themselves offensively, they try and put the game away early. Could have put the game away early. Georgia's defense has a lot to do with that. So that'll go into something I'm going to talk about in just a second. Georgia was in a dangerous position last night. Not just the fact that they could have lost the game. Kirby talked about it after the game. If you were following practice reports leading up to this game, they're banged up on the defensive front, and they're not deep there. Part of the reason why I was a little more hesitant while everyone was bullish on them in the preseason was because this was a fear of mine. So they had 3 defensive linemen each play 50-plus snaps last night, and the next closest guy played 17. They were very thin. They're lucky they were playing Kentucky. Hey. Because if they had a team that ran a little more pace and tempo, the trade-off may have been they got them off the field more because they were less physical. But had they gotten a team that sustained some drives on them, they would have been gassed much earlier than a normal Georgia team would be gassed because they didn't have the depth. They didn't have the manpower. They got a bye now at the perfect time. But there was a part of this afterwards that I thought was interesting and intentional by Kirby Smart. So, they've had a lot of off-the-field issues. They had another one this past week where a guy got arrested for driving over 100 up there in an area of Athens I know well, and you got no business driving over 100 in that part of Athens, Georgia. So I'll tell you what. I'll let Colin play what Kirby said after this game. I want you to pay close attention to the words he uses and pay close attention to the criticism that's been thrown at that program. Let's roll it.
I honestly believe we won this game with culture, and the culture of our team never panicked. I saw more leadership tonight than I've seen all season, and you guys have asked me 1,000 questions about this team this, what about this team this. I don't know much about this team, but I found out more tonight than I've known up to this point, and that makes me extremely proud of how they responded and how they handled some difficult situations.
So this thing's pretty nuanced. Georgia's got off the field issues with driving related arrests and citations. And so I'm on record as saying I think they got one of the best cultures competitively in the sport. So then when the off the field stuff happens, like it did again last week, I got a ton of folks. I can just guarantee you hundreds of them are going to come at me and say, I thought you said they got great culture. Boy, I bet you're ready to eat those words. Well, I'm kind of not. I'm kind of not because competitively, I still think they've got the best culture in college football. It is a very nuanced discussion. Competitive culture versus overall leadership and overall accountability beyond the field, those are obviously two different things because Georgia's got a mess on their hands in one of those compartments, and they got a really rock solid situation on their hands in the other compartment. Will it ultimately cost you? I don't know. That's what we play the games for. We have tale as old as time. Season after season, you've got teams that fall short of expectation. And afterwards, when you get into spring and you're listening to stories when people don't have to keep their mouth shut about the previous year's team anymore, you hear story after story of, well, we just didn't have the right kind of leadership. Well, we didn't have the right kind of guys in the foxhole. Who knows? Maybe they say that about this Georgia team down the road. But I do know Kirby Smart knows his team better than me or anyone else does. And I do know he is not flippant with that kind of language. So he's heard it. He's heard folks questioning their culture. They take it really personal. They take it personal because they think they've got really, really good culture. They work a lot on it. Everyone does. But the reason I'm so animated sometimes when I talk about this is because I know how militant they've been about getting that stuff right. And it just hasn't worked. And it makes you pull your hair out because you think you're doing everything you know to do. And then you got folks coming in saying, well, no, you haven't done everything. You could just kick them off the team. You could have a zero tolerance policy. And I'm like, you'd never do that. I got folks with a serious look on their face telling me, well, you know, Kirby Smart's policy should be that anytime someone has a first offense, traffic related, they should be kicked off the team. That's stupid. And you would never do that. Now, you know good and well you can run your mouth and say that because no one's ever going to put a football program in your hands. You'll never lead one. So you'll never have to implement rules that would get you fired. That is a very, very dumb way to run a football program. Now, the flip side of that coin is when the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again, you got to search until you find the right answer. But my take that has gotten a lot of criticism is I look past that. Yeah, it's ultimately his job. Yeah, it's ultimately his responsibility. I look past that and I look at the locker room and I say, outside of the view of coaches, when is someone else going to take accountability and take control of their team? Kirby Smart can be there 15 more years if he wants. If you're a junior or senior on that team, you got a few years. And then you'll come back to Athens 40 years from now. And unlike Kirby Smart, who will have a bunch of rings to talk about, you've got this little 3, 4, 5-year snapshot. And that's your story. That's your Georgia story. You really want to let it get pissed away and fall short of expectation because folks can't keep their head on straight off the field? That's been my take on that. So, back to the football-related matters, I think there's going to be a tendency for a lot of people, I think, watching Georgia survive a close win, and they're going to say, oh, this is exactly what Georgia needed. Now, I think this is mainly folks wanting to make themselves feel better, and sometimes it happens. Sometimes you play an ugly game, and you have sky-high capability, and it triggers something in your team collectively, and they end up being way better for it. Other times, you just keep saying that to yourself, and you're ignoring the obvious, and that is you got a flawed football team. So there could be a little bit of both in play here with Georgia. But I was asking because I had one of my buddies, a cousin of mine actually, who said, not by blood, I just call him a cousin. I had that person telling me last night, you know, I'm glad we won, but I'm glad we won this way because this is exactly what this team needed. And I said, they needed it to do what? He said, well, we'll just wake up now. I said, and do what? He said, well, I mean, the offense will finally get clicking. Well, they better because that offensive line is supposed to be one of the best in the country. It is not right now. At running game, supposed to be a strength of a team. It's not right now. Running backs were bad in pass pro last night as well. Carson Beck was under duress a whole lot more than he has business being under duress. And so this was a top 5 scoring offense last year. And their profile, I thought, looked to be every bit on par with what they had the capability of doing last year, and it's not there right now. And you cannot do anything but call that offensive line a little bit of a disappointment so far this year, and especially last night. So the difference is Georgia's got the capability of being the best team in the country. So all these units, all these pieces, that wide receiver core included, that quarterback, obviously, those running backs, they've got the potential to be among the best in the country at doing what they do. Other places have a much lower ceiling on their position rooms and their offensive unit than Georgia does. So if this is the moment that it takes to wake them up, so be it, and good on them. I don't automatically assume that happens. So they got a bye week. Their next game is 2 Saturdays from now in prime time in Bryant-Denny Stadium. So what I'm saying is it's not UT Chattanooga coming up next. We will have some pretty definitive answers. Now, it's a 12-team playoff now, so you can lose 2 or 3 games and still get in. So you won't have the tightrope walk. You won't have the do-or-die sort of environment around that game like you used to have. But you'll learn a lot about both those teams.